When I told my wife that I was very excited and looking forward to her sister's law school graduation tomorrow, my wife replied, "It was last week. Paying her fees doesn't make you that important." A month later, they begged to reverse what I did. I said, "No. You know those moments when life politely slaps you in the face, then offers you a refund in sarcasm? Yeah, that was me last Tuesday, standing in our kitchen like some kind of discount greeting card model, holding a gift bag that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, smiling like an absolute idiot who still believed in the basic concept of family communication." I had spent the better part of my lunch break hunting down the perfect graduation gift for Sophie, my sister-in-law, because apparently I'm the kind of guy who thinks thoughtfulness still matters in a world where people ghost you after you Venmo them rent money. The gift bag was one of those fancy ones too, not the crinkled dollar store variety. I'm talking about the boutique joint with the ribbon handles that practically screamed, "I care about your achievements and also have disposable income." "Babe, I'm so pumped for Sophie's graduation tomorrow," I said, setting the bag down on the kitchen counter with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for winning lottery tickets or finding out your ex got audited by the IRS. Finally seeing her walk that stage after all those late-night study sessions, all those times she called crying about case law and constitutional amendments, man, it's going to be emotional watching her get that diploma. I was genuinely excited, which in retrospect makes me look like an even bigger chump than I already felt. I had been there for every panicked 3 a.m. phone call about the Socratic method, every breakdown about tort law, every existential crisis about whether she'd picked the right career path. I'd listened, encouraged, and most importantly, funded the entire operation like some kind of educational sugar daddy without the weird implications. My wife, Jessica, didn't even look up from her phone when I spoke, which should have been my first clue that something was cosmically wrong with this entire situation. She was doing that thing where she scrolls through Instagram with her thumb moving at approximately the speed of light, probably double tapping on pictures of someone's overpriced brunch or a motivational quote superimposed over a sunset. Her face had that blank expression people get when they're about to deliver news that'll ruin your whole week, but they're trying to phrase it so they don't look like the bad guy.
"Oh, that was last week," she said, her voice flatter than a pancake that gave up on life. Then she added, without even blinking, without a single molecule of remorse or acknowledgement that this might be important information to share with the person who basically funded the entire degree, "Paying her fees doesn't make you that important." Let me tell you something about that moment right there. That specific combination of words delivered with the emotional warmth of a DMV employee on their last day before retirement. It wasn't just a statement. It was a revelation, an epiphany, a cosmic kick in the teeth delivered by the universe with surgical precision. Imagine paying thousands upon thousands of dollars for someone's education, sacrificing your own wants and needs, postponing that vacation you'd been dreaming about, driving a car that makes concerning noises because you prioritize someone else's tuition over your own basic maintenance, only to be told you're basically background furniture. You're the IKEA bookshelf of the family. Functional, necessary for holding up important stuff, but absolutely not invited to the family photo? I stood there in our kitchen, which suddenly felt about 20 degrees colder, despite the fact that our heating bill was absurdly high because Jessica liked to keep the thermostat at tropical resort during winter months. Blinking at her like my brain had just encountered a fatal error and was desperately trying to reboot. You know that Windows screen that pops up when your computer realizes it's screwed? That blue screen of death? That was my face, except instead of error codes, it was displaying pure, unfiltered confusion mixed with a gradually rising sense of, "Are you actually kidding me right now?" My mouth opened and closed a few times, making me look like a goldfish who just discovered his bowl was actually a prison and his whole life had been a lie. It wasn't just about missing a graduation, though. Let's be real. That sucked harder than a vacuum cleaner on steroids. It was the sudden crystallizing realization that I was the ATM in human form, the walking, talking bank account that dispensed cash on demand, but didn't warrant an invitation to the actual celebration. I was basically that fee-free ATM you find in sketchy convenience stores. Convenient, always accessible, and completely taken for granted. Nobody sends a thank you card to an ATM. Nobody invites an ATM to graduations or family dinners or acknowledges that the ATM has feelings and might appreciate being included in major life events that it literally financed. The gift bag sat there on the counter, mocking me with its cheerful ribbon and carefully selected contents. I'd spent 2 hours picking out the perfect pen set, one of those fancy ones that lawyers supposedly love, the kind that makes you feel important when you're signing documents. I'd included a heartfelt card where I'd written something embarrassingly sincere about how proud I was of her accomplishments. Now it just felt like evidence of my own stupidity, a paper trail of my willingness to be used like a credit card with no limit and apparently no expiration date.
But here's the thing about moments like these. They clarify everything with the brightness of 1,000 suns. Standing there looking at my wife, who still hadn't put down her phone, still hadn't acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, this was a pretty messed up way to treat someone, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, more calculated, more final. It was the sound of a door closing, a bridge burning, a chapter ending with a period instead of a comma. Okay, I thought, my mind suddenly crystal clear despite the emotional chaos swirling around like a tornado made of disappointment and credit card statements. If they want to treat me like an ATM, if that's really how they see me, not as family, not as someone worthy of basic respect and communication, but as a convenient source of funding that doesn't require acknowledgement or inclusion, then fine. Absolutely fine. I can work with that. I can adapt to that new understanding of our relationship. They'll soon learn that ATMs, for all their convenience, have a fascinating feature that people often forget about until it's too late. ATMs can decline transactions too. They can shut down. They can display that soul-crushing message, insufficient funds. Except in this case, it wouldn't be insufficient funds, it would be insufficient respect, insufficient consideration, insufficient basic human decency. I picked up the gift bag slowly, feeling its weight in my hand, and walked past Jessica without saying another word. She didn't look up, didn't ask where I was going, didn't seem to register that anything significant had just happened. But something had happened, something irreversible and absolute. The guy who'd walked into that kitchen 5 minutes ago, excited and hopeful and stupidly optimistic, he was gone. The guy walking out was someone different, someone who just learned an expensive lesson about the difference between being loved and being useful, between being family and being a resource. As I headed toward my office, the one room in the house that was actually mine, filled with my stuff, my space, my sanctuary, I started doing what I do best. I started calculating, planning, organizing the chaos into neat columns of numbers and possibilities. See, most people don't know this about me, but I work in finance. I'm good with numbers, really good. I understand cash flow and assets and leverage, and most importantly, I understand how to build systems and how to dismantle them with equal precision. And right then, standing in the hallway with a graduation gift for an event I wasn't invited to, I began constructing the framework for the most satisfying spreadsheet I'd ever create. They wanted me to be an ATM. Perfect. But every ATM has an owner, someone who controls the access codes, someone who decides when it's operational and when it's out of service. And this particular ATM was about to undergo some serious maintenance. Jessica's family had always been like that free trial app you forget to cancel. You know the kind I'm talking about, right? The one that seems totally harmless at first, maybe even useful, offering you all these premium features for just 99 cents for the first month. And you think, hey, that's a pretty sweet deal. I can definitely remember to cancel this before they start charging me the full price. Except you don't remember, because life happens and you're busy and distracted, and suddenly 3 months later you're looking at your credit card statement, wondering why there's a $40 charge for some meditation app you used exactly once while sitting in traffic. That was Jessica's family in a nutshell. Harmless at first, almost charming in their neediness, but eventually billing you for your soul in installments you never quite agreed to, but somehow kept paying anyway. Her sister Sophie? Oh man, where do I even start with Sophie? I'd funded her entire law degree. And I'm not talking about just tuition here, folks. I'm talking about the whole enchilada, the complete package, the all-inclusive resort experience of higher education. Tuition? Check. And that was the easy part. Just a nice, casual $40,000 per year that made my accountant weep softly into his calculator. Books? Absolutely, because apparently law textbooks are printed on pages made from unicorn tears and bound with dragon leather, judging by the price tags that made my credit card physically recoil in horror. Housing? Of course, because Sophie needed to live in one of those upscale student apartments near campus, the kind with a gym she never used and a study lounge that was really just Instagram backdrop material. And let's not forget her coffee for studying budget, which was supposedly essential for her academic success, but somehow mysteriously included new AirPods, a MacBook upgrade, and what I'm pretty sure was a weekend trip to Miami that she claimed was for a legal conference. But her Instagram stories told a very different tale involving beach clubs and bottles of champagne that cost more than my monthly car payment. Her parents. Now, those two were a special breed of financial vampires wrapped in the cozy sweater of parental authority. They'd called me son right up until the exact moment I stopped sponsoring their vacation emergencies, which was a term they used with alarming frequency for people who seemed to have a vacation emergency every other month. Apparently, Jessica's dad needed to go to Vegas for his mental health approximately 4 times a year, and each time it was presented as this urgent, absolutely necessary thing for his well-being. Like if he didn't get to play blackjack and eat at overpriced buffets, he might actually perish from stress. Jessica's mom had her own version of vacation emergencies, which usually involved spa retreats in Sedona or wine country tours in Napa, all of which were framed as self-care, but really just translated to send money so I can drink expensive wine and complain about my back pain to strangers in bathrobes. And Jessica, oh, my sweet, beautiful, manipulative wife, had mastered the art of saying we when she meant me, with the skill of a seasoned politician dodging questions about their offshore accounts. We should help my parents with their mortgage this month, she'd say, except we meant my paycheck, my savings account, my bonus that I'd worked 60-hour weeks to earn. We need to make sure Sophie has everything she needs for school, she'd announce, as if we were both equally contributing to this financial black hole, when in reality, I was the sole sponsor of the Sophie Educational Fund, while Jessica contributed moral support and the occasional text message asking how her sister was doing. It was linguistic gymnastics at an Olympic level, the way she could make my money sound like our collective responsibility, turning my bank account into a community resource, like some kind of financial potluck where I brought the entire meal and everyone else brought paper plates. Looking back now, with the crystal clear vision that only comes from having your face repeatedly smacked by reality's cold, unforgiving hand, I should have noticed the red flags waving so frantically they could have generated electricity. Like when they called my car our family SUV, even though it had my name on the loan, my signature on approximately 73 pieces of paperwork, and my soul attached to the monthly payment plan that stretched out before me like a highway to financial purgatory. But no, it was our SUV because Jessica's mom needed rides to her book club, and Sophie needed to borrow it for weekend trips. And Jessica's dad somehow thought it was totally reasonable to take it for a week when his car was in the shop, returning it with an empty gas tank and mysterious stains on the back seat that I chose not to investigate because sometimes ignorance really is bliss. Their fingerprints were literally all over the paint, smudged on the doors and windows like evidence at a crime scene, while my name sat alone on all the official documents, shouldering the burden of ownership without any of the actual control. The red flags were everywhere, honestly, flying at full mast like I was living at the United Nations of financial abuse. There was the time Jessica's parents asked to borrow $5,000 for a roof repair that somehow never actually happened, but they did manage to take a cruise to the Bahamas that same month. There was Sophie's insistence that I co-sign her credit card because it would help her build credit, which really meant I got to watch her max it out on designer handbags and brunch dates, while I received the lovely notifications about approaching credit limits. There was Jessica's habit of making major purchases and then informing me about them after the fact, always with that same innocent smile and the explanation that she knew I wouldn't mind because I was so generous, which is just code for I'm going to spend your money and frame it as a personality trait of yours rather than a boundary violation on my part. Still, I kept quiet through all of it, playing the role of the accommodating husband, the supportive brother-in-law, the reliable son-in-law who could always be counted on to open his wallet when the family needed something. I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that family was about being there for each other, that money wasn't as important as relationships and maintaining harmony. I swallowed my frustration when Sophie didn't thank me for her tuition payments, just sent a casual text asking when the next semester's fees would be processed. I bit my tongue when Jessica's parents made jokes about how lucky their daughter was to have married someone stable, which was their polite way of saying, with money we can access. I smiled and nodded when Jessica explained that her family was just going through a rough patch and needed our help, even though the rough patch had been going on for the entire 6 years of our marriage and showed no signs of smoothing out. I convinced myself that this was normal, that all families operated this way, that I was being the bigger person by providing financial support without expecting recognition or even basic gratitude. I told myself stories about how they really did appreciate me, they just weren't good at expressing it, and that someday they'd realize how much I'd done for them, and there'd be this beautiful moment of acknowledgement and appreciation. I was basically writing fan fiction about my own life, creating a narrative where I was the noble, self-sacrificing hero who would eventually be rewarded for his generosity, instead of what I actually was, a human ATM with feelings that nobody bothered to consider because ATMs don't have feelings. They just dispense cash and occasionally eat your card when they're feeling spiteful. Now standing in my office with that ridiculous graduation gift bag sitting on my desk like a monument to my own stupidity, it just felt like stupidity with a receipt, a paper trail of my willingness to be used and discarded. Every bank statement was a chapter in the sad story of a guy who confused being needed with being loved, who thought that if he just gave enough, paid for enough, sacrificed enough, eventually he'd earn the kind of respect and consideration that should have been freely given from the start. The receipts told a story that my heart hadn't wanted to read. Thousands of dollars flowing out to Sophie's education, Jessica's parents' emergencies, the endless list of family needs that somehow always required my money, but never my presence at the celebrations that money made possible. But here's the thing about having a career in finance. You learn to read the numbers, to see patterns, to understand when an investment is paying returns and when you're just throwing money into a black hole that will never, ever give anything back except demands for more. When betrayal happens, there's always that one cousin who spills the tea with Olympic precision, delivering gossip with the accuracy of a heat-seeking missile and the timing of a Broadway musical number. In my case, it was Chloe, Jessica's loud but lovable cousin who'd sell family secrets for a croissant. And honestly, I mean that literally. I once watched her reveal that her uncle was having an affair in exchange for a chocolate croissant at Starbucks. And she didn't even wait until she finished chewing to drop that bombshell. Chloe was the kind of person who made family reunions simultaneously entertaining and dangerous because you never knew when she'd casually mention something that would blow up someone's entire life, usually right around the time dessert was being served. She had zero filter, negative discretion, and the moral compass of a reality TV show producer, which meant she was absolutely terrible at keeping secrets, but fantastic at making sure I knew exactly what was happening behind my back. She called me that evening right around 7:30, which I remember specifically because I was sitting in my office staring at my laptop screen, pretending to work on a financial report, but really just spiraling into an existential crisis about my marriage and my life choices. Her name popped up on my phone, and normally I might have let it go to voicemail because Chloe's calls usually lasted minimum 45 minutes and covered everything from her latest dating disaster to her opinions about whatever celebrity drama was trending on Twitter. But something told me to answer. Maybe intuition, or maybe just the universe throwing me a bone for once. So I picked up on the third ring. "Hey, you didn't know Sophie's graduation was last Saturday?" Chloe said, skipping right past any normal greeting like hello or how are you, diving straight into the deep end of the pool like someone who'd been waiting all day to make this call. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who's about to ruin your day, but is also kind of excited about it, like a kid who knows where the Christmas presents are hidden and can barely contain themselves from spilling the beans. I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard, my brain trying to process what she'd just said, while simultaneously hoping I'd misheard her. "Everyone?" I asked, my voice coming out weird and strangled, like I was being slowly crushed by the weight of this information.
Yep, everyone, Chloe confirmed, and I could hear her settling in for a proper gossip session, probably getting comfortable on her couch with a glass of wine, ready to unpack this entire situation like it was her job. They even had a banner. It said, "Thank you, Mom and Dad." I saw it in the pictures. Sophie posted like 50 of them on Instagram. The banner was huge, too. One of those custom ones from that expensive print shop downtown. Must have cost at least $200. Looked really nice, all professional with flowers and everything. No mention of me, not even a footnote, not a tiny acknowledgement, not a thanks to the guy who paid the bills or shout out to the brother-in-law whose credit card made this possible. Nothing. Zilch. Nada. I wasn't even in the Instagram posts, which meant they hadn't just forgotten to tell me about the graduation. They'd actively planned an entire event, coordinated with venues and photographers and banner companies, organized what was clearly a pretty significant celebration, and deliberately excluded me from all of it. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. This was intentional omission on a scale that required actual effort and planning. Why wasn't I told? I asked, already knowing the answer would make me want to punch something inanimate and expensive, probably that decorative vase Jessica had insisted we buy for the living room that cost more than a reasonable person's monthly grocery budget. Chloe paused, and I could practically hear her weighing whether she should tell me the truth or try to soften the blow, engaging in that internal debate people have when they know the information they're about to share is going to hurt, but also feel like it needs to be said. She went with honesty, which I appreciated, even though it felt like swallowing broken glass. Jessica said, "You might make it about yourself." I laughed so hard I almost choked on my own spit. One of those bitter, incredulous laughs that sounds more like a bark than actual amusement. The kind of laugh that happens when something is so absurd and infuriating that your brain short-circuits and defaults to hysteria. Make it about myself. Make it about myself. I paid for the degree.
I funded 4 years of law school, covered every single expense from the application fees to the bar exam prep courses, sacrificed my own financial goals and dreams so that Sophie could pursue hers, and apparently acknowledging that reality was making it about myself. I practically deserve an honorary diploma at this point, maybe even a parking space with my name on it in the faculty lot, perhaps a small plaque in the law library that says, "Funded by the guy who got erased from the thank you banner." The sheer audacity of that statement, that me wanting to be included in a celebration I literally financed was somehow selfish or attention-seeking, made me want to laugh and scream and possibly throw my phone across the room all at the same time. It was gaslighting on a professional level, the kind of manipulation that reframes reasonable expectations as unreasonable demands, that takes your legitimate hurt feelings and twists them into character flaws. Of course I'd want to be at the graduation. Of course I'd want to be acknowledged for my contribution. That's not making it about myself. That's basic human decency and recognition of reality.
She said that? I asked Chloe, needing confirmation, even though I already knew it was true, could feel the truth of it settling into my bones like cold concrete. Word for word, Chloe confirmed, her voice sympathetic now, probably recognizing that she just detonated a bomb in my emotional landscape. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew and just couldn't make it or something. I didn't realize they'd kept it from you completely. That's really messed up, even for this family. And trust me, I've seen this family do some pretty messed up stuff over the years." That's when the gears turned in my head, clicking into place like a lock opening, like tumblers falling into alignment, revealing possibilities I hadn't previously considered. I didn't plan revenge right away. I'm not that impulsive, despite what my increasingly angry internal monologue might suggest. But I started budgeting it, running calculations in my head, mapping out the financial infrastructure that connected me to Jessica's family, like a complicated network of pipes and valves that I suddenly realized I had complete control over. See, the thing about being the money guy, the financial backbone of an entire extended family's lifestyle, is that you hold a lot more power than people realize. They get comfortable, complacent, assuming the money will always flow like a river, never considering that rivers can be dammed, redirected, or shut off entirely by someone who knows where all the sources are located. I started mentally cataloging everything, every account, every autopay, every financial connection that tied me to their lives. Sophie's rent, which came directly from my checking account every month like clockwork. The credit card I'd gotten in my name for family emergencies that Jessica's parents used for everything from groceries to gas to what I'm pretty sure was a new television last month. The Netflix account, the Spotify family plan, the Amazon Prime subscription that somehow served 8 people despite being registered to me. The car insurance policy that covered Jessica's vehicle under my plan because it was cheaper that way. The phone bill that included Sophie's line because we'd added her years ago and never removed her. Every single thread of financial support I'd woven into their lives over the years. All those small conveniences and large expenses that I'd absorbed without complaint suddenly looked very different in this new light. Chloe was still talking, filling me in on other details from the graduation. Who was there, what Sophie wore, how Jessica's parents gave this whole speech about sacrifice and family support without mentioning me once. How there was a dinner afterward at some fancy restaurant that I'd probably unwittingly funded through one of Jessica's credit cards. But I was only half listening now, my mind already working through scenarios, calculating timelines, planning moves with the strategic thinking of someone who'd finally realized they were playing chess while everyone else thought we were playing checkers. "You still there?" Chloe asked, probably noticing my silence. "Yeah," I said, my voice calmer now, clearer, filled with the kind of quiet determination that comes from finally seeing the path forward. "Just thinking about some changes I need to make." "Changes?"
Chloe sounded intrigued, probably sensing drama on the horizon, like a shark smelling blood in the water. Budget adjustments, I said simply, allowing myself a smile that felt more genuine than anything I'd felt in weeks. Just some budget adjustments. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen like an unpaid intern who'd found out the CEO stole his lunch from the break room fridge. Except, instead of a sandwich, they'd stolen my dignity, my financial security, and apparently my invitation to major family events. I'd spent the entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, running through conversations in my head, rehearsing different approaches and responses like an actor prepping for the performance of a lifetime. By the time the sun came up, I was operating on approximately 0 hours of sleep, 3 cups of coffee that I'd already consumed, and pure distilled righteous indignation that felt like jet fuel coursing through my veins. Jessica was already in the kitchen, naturally doing her morning routine like absolutely nothing was wrong, like she hadn't orchestrated an entire graduation ceremony that excluded the person who financed it. She was standing by the espresso machine, the fancy Italian one that cost $2,000, and that I'd bought her for Christmas because she said regular coffee makers were beneath her standards. Wearing one of those expensive silk pajama sets that cost more than some people's weekly paychecks, looking perfectly put together, even at 7 in the morning. Her hair was in one of those effortlessly messy buns that actually takes 20 minutes and 14 bobby pins to achieve, and she was scrolling through her phone with one hand while holding a tiny cup of espresso in the other, the very picture of casual indifference. "Why didn't you tell me about the graduation?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and measured, channeling every ounce of self-control I possessed to not immediately launch into a screaming match that would probably wake the neighbors and definitely wouldn't solve anything. I positioned myself on the other side of the kitchen island, the marble countertop serving as a physical barrier between us, which felt symbolically appropriate, given the emotional distance that had apparently existed without my knowledge. She sipped her coffee like a queen addressing a peasant who dared to question her royal decree, taking her sweet time before responding, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably, like she was testing to see if I'd back down or rephrase the question into something less confrontational. Her eyes barely flicked up from her phone screen, like this conversation was a minor inconvenience interrupting her morning scroll through whatever social media platform was currently consuming her attention. "Because it wasn't a big deal," she finally said, her tone suggesting that I was being dramatic for even bringing it up, like I'd asked why she hadn't informed me about a minor dentist appointment rather than a major life milestone I'd financially supported. "You don't have to be at everything," she added. And there was something in her voice that made my blood pressure spike, this dismissive quality, like she was explaining basic concepts to someone particularly slow on the uptake, like I was the unreasonable one for expecting basic courtesy in communication. "Right," I said, nodding slowly, letting that word hang in the air between us like smoke. "Just the things that cost me money." The sarcasm in my voice was thick enough to cut with a knife, sharp enough to draw blood. And I watched her face carefully for any sign of recognition, any flicker of guilt or acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, she could see how messed up this whole situation was. She frowned, but it wasn't the kind of frown that suggested remorse or self-reflection. It was annoyance, pure and simple. The expression of someone who's irritated that their actions are being questioned, rather than someone who's genuinely concerned about having hurt someone they supposedly love. "Don't be dramatic," she said, setting her coffee cup down with a little more force than necessary, the clink of ceramic against marble echoing through the kitchen like a tiny declaration of war. "Oh, I'm not," I replied, allowing myself a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. One of those corporate smiles you give during meetings when someone's pitching an obviously terrible idea, but you have to maintain professional courtesy. "I'm saving the drama for next month's budget." I let that statement settle, watching her process it, seeing the moment when the words registered but the meaning didn't quite land, like she'd heard me but hadn't actually understood what I was saying yet. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly, her phone finally lowering as I apparently became interesting enough to warrant her full attention for the first time in this conversation. "It means," I said, slowly, deliberately, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have, "that I'm going to be making some financial adjustments, reallocating resources, cutting unnecessary expenses, basic budget management." I pulled out my own phone, opening up the banking app I'd been meticulously studying for the past 12 hours, the one that showed every automatic payment, every linked account, every financial thread connecting me to this family that apparently didn't think I was important enough to include in their celebrations. Her face did this interesting thing where confusion mixed with the first tiny spark of concern, like a pilot light flickering to life in her brain, beginning to illuminate the potential consequences of her actions. "You're being ridiculous," she said, but there was less certainty in her voice now, a slight waver that suggested maybe she was starting to understand that this wasn't just another argument we'd have and then forget about by dinner time. "Am I?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective at this point, morbidly fascinated by how she was justifying this in her head. "Because from where I'm standing, I've been more than generous. I've funded your sister's entire education, supported your parents' lifestyle, paid for family vacations I wasn't invited on, and apparently financed a graduation celebration that I wasn't important enough to attend. So yeah, I think some budget adjustments are not just reasonable, but long overdue." That's when her parents decided to make their entrance, because of course they did, because the universe has a sick sense of timing, and this confrontation apparently needed an audience. Jessica's dad walked in first, wearing one of those expensive golf shirts that I'm 90% sure I bought him last Father's Day, followed by her mom in a designer tracksuit that definitely came from my credit card. They'd been staying with us for the past week, something about their house being fumigated, though I was starting to suspect that was just another convenient excuse to save money on their own living expenses while draining mine.
"What's all the commotion about?" her dad asked, heading straight for the coffee maker like he owned the place, which I guess in his mind he kinda did, since he'd been treating my house like an extension of his own for years now. He had that particular brand of older male confidence that comes from never having been told no, from sailing through life assuming that everything would always work out in his favor because it always had before. "I'm just explaining to Jessica that I'll be making some changes to our financial arrangements," I said pleasantly, keeping my tone conversational, like we were discussing the weather or weekend plans rather than the complete restructuring of their gravy train. Jessica's mom stopped mid-reach for a mug, her hand freezing in the air like she'd been suddenly paused. "What kind of changes?" she asked, and I could hear the alarm in her voice, that immediate spike of panic that happens when someone who's been living comfortably on someone else's dime suddenly realizes the money might stop flowing. "Oh, nothing major," I said with a shrug that was deliberately casual, understated, the kind of gesture that suggests something is actually very major, but you're pretending it's not. "Just reassessing which expenses are necessary and which ones aren't. Making sure my money is going toward people and things that actually value my contribution. Basic financial responsibility, really. I'm sure you understand." Her dad bristled, his face doing that thing where men of a certain age get red around the collar when their authority is questioned. "Now, hold on a minute," he started, but I cut him off, which I'd never done before, always having played the role of the respectful son-in-law who deferred to his elders even when they were being completely unreasonable. "No, you hold on," I said, my voice still calm, but with an edge that surprised even me, like I'd found a backbone I didn't know I had been growing over the past 24 hours. "I've been holding on for 6 years. I've been patient and generous and accommodating while being treated like a walking ATM instead of a family member. So now it's your turn to hold on. Hold on to the lifestyle you've built on my dime while I figure out if I want to keep funding it." The kitchen went silent, except for the humming of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Jessica was staring at me like she'd never seen me before.
Her parents were frozen in various states of reaching for coffee supplies, and I was standing there feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, like I'd just jumped out of an airplane and was waiting to see if the parachute would open. "You're taking this too far," her dad finally said, trying to regain control of the conversation, using that authoritative dad voice that probably worked on his daughters, but definitely wasn't going to work on me anymore. "Taking what too far?" I asked innocently. "Taking my own financial security seriously? Taking care of my own interests for once? Or are you saying I'm taking it too far by expecting to be treated with basic respect and consideration?" Jessica stepped forward, her expression shifting to something that might have been concern or might have been strategic calculation. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. "Honey, we made a mistake. Let's fix this," she said, her voice dropping into that soft, placating tone she used when she wanted something, when she was trying to smooth things over and get back to the comfortable status quo where I paid for everything and didn't complain about it. "Which part?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know which specific mistake she was willing to acknowledge, which piece of this elaborate pattern of disrespect she was prepared to take responsibility for. The lying? The erasing me? Or the part where I funded the season finale of your family's drama without even getting a ticket to watch the show? I work in finance, which means I don't throw tantrums like some reality TV star whose latte order got messed up at Starbucks. I don't scream. I don't break dishes. I don't storm out of rooms, slamming doors behind me in dramatic displays of emotion that accomplish nothing except maybe damaging the door hinges and giving the neighbors something to gossip about over their morning coffee. No, when people in finance get angry, we do something far more effective and infinitely more satisfying. We file paperwork. We create spreadsheets. We systematically dismantle financial structures with the precision of a surgeon and the cold efficiency of a machine that's been programmed for one specific task: cutting off access. The beauty of revenge executed through financial channels is that it's completely legal, totally justified, and absolutely devastating when done correctly. There's no yelling, no physical confrontation, no messy emotional scenes that can be turned against you later. Just clean, crisp, documented actions that speak louder than any argument ever could. It's the difference between setting something on fire and simply turning off the oxygen supply. Same result, way less mess, significantly more control over the process. I started by closing the joint savings account that was somehow only jointly spent, which is a polite way of saying that I deposited money into it and Jessica's family withdrew money from it like they were playing some kind of ATM slot machine that always paid out. The account had been established 3 years ago, under the premise that we needed a place to save for our future together, maybe a down payment on a bigger house or an emergency fund for unexpected expenses. In reality, it had become a slush fund for Sophie's unexpected expenses, which happened with alarming regularity, Jessica's parents' temporary financial shortfalls, which have been temporary for going on 3 years now, and various other family emergencies that always seem to require immediate cash infusions from yours truly. Closing the account took exactly 45 minutes, including the wait time while I waited for a customer service representative who sounded way too chipper for 8:30 in the morning. I transferred the remaining balance, which was considerably less than it should have been considering my consistent deposits, into a new account that only had my name on it, one that didn't have any joint access, any shared debit cards, any possible way for anyone but me to touch that money. The bank representative asked if I was sure, if I wanted to discuss this decision with my spouse first, if there was anything they could do to help resolve whatever marital issues might be prompting this change. I politely declined their concern, assured them I was absolutely certain, and felt a little thrill of satisfaction when the confirmation email hit my inbox exactly 3 minutes later. Then I changed the autopay for Sophie's bar exam fees, which were scheduled to come out of my checking account in approximately 2 weeks. The bar exam isn't cheap, We're talking about $1,500 between the registration fees, the character and fitness application, and all the other random charges they tack on that seem designed specifically to bankrupt law students before they even start practicing. I'd already paid for her bar prep course, which was another $3,000 that I'd handed over without complaint because Sophie really needs this to pass and it's an investment in her future and various other justifications that sounded reasonable at the time, but now just seemed like elaborate excuses to separate me from my money. Canceling that autopay took less than 5 minutes. I logged into my banking app, navigated to the scheduled payment section, found the one designated for Sophie's bar exam, and hit delete. The system asked me to confirm, warning me that this payment was scheduled to process soon, and canceling it might result in late fees or registration issues. I confirmed anyway, watching that little scheduled payment notification disappear from my screen with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for finally scratching an itch that's been bothering you for hours. The next day, Jessica called me from work, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, that particular frequency of stress that happens when someone discovers their financial safety net has suddenly vanished. "The bank app isn't showing the joint balance," she said, skipping any greeting or small talk, diving straight into the crisis that was apparently consuming her attention in the middle of her workday. I could hear office noises in the background, phones ringing, people talking, the general buzz of a workplace, which meant she was making this call in public, probably trying to keep her voice down so her coworkers wouldn't overhear that her family's convenient money source had dried up. "Maybe it's shy," I said, keeping my tone light and casual, like we were discussing a minor technical glitch rather than the deliberate demolition of their financial access. "Give it some space. Sometimes things need room to breathe, personal boundaries and all that." The sarcasm was probably a bit thick, but honestly, I was enjoying this way more than I should have been. There's something deeply satisfying about playing dumb when someone's trying to confront you about something you absolutely did on purpose.
"This isn't funny," Jessica hissed, her voice dropping even lower, probably ducking into a conference room or bathroom for privacy. "Where's the money? What did you do?" The accusation in her tone was clear, like I'd committed some kind of crime by managing my own finances, like I'd violated some unspoken agreement by daring to control my own bank accounts. "I moved it," I said simply, offering no elaboration, no explanation, no justification for my actions, because frankly, I didn't owe her one. "To an account where I can actually track where it's going." Funny thing about joint accounts, they're supposed to be for joint decisions, but I couldn't remember the last time anyone asked my opinion before making a withdrawal. So I solved that problem. You're welcome. She sputtered something about trust and marriage and how I was being unreasonable. But I'd already heard this song and dance before, and I wasn't interested in the encore performance. I let her vent for about 30 seconds, listening to the rising panic in her voice with the detachment of someone watching a movie they've seen before and didn't particularly like the first time, before cutting her off mid-sentence. "I've got a meeting," I said, which was technically true. I had a meeting with my own sense of self-respect and boundaries, which had been languishing in a corner for the past 6 years and desperately needed some attention. "We can talk about this later. Or not. I'm flexible." I hung up before she could respond, silencing my phone immediately because I knew the callbacks and text messages would start coming rapid fire, and I wasn't interested in engaging with the panic spiral that was undoubtedly beginning to unfold. Sophie texted me around 3 in the afternoon, her message popping up on my screen with the kind of urgency that suggested she'd just discovered a major problem. "Hey, got a notification that my bar exam payment didn't go through. The registration deadline is next week, and they're saying I need to pay ASA or I'll lose my spot. Can you check what happened?" The message was casual, almost breezy, like this was just a minor technical issue that I'd obviously want to fix immediately, because that's what I always did: fix things, solve problems, pay for stuff without question or complaint.
I looked at that text for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, thinking about all the times I dropped everything to handle Sophie's financial emergencies, all the times I'd scrambled to make payments work, all the times I prioritized her needs over my wants. I thought about the graduation I hadn't been invited to, the banner that thanked everyone except me, the casual dismissal of my contribution as if it meant nothing, as if I meant nothing beyond the checks I wrote and the credit cards I provided. Then I replied with the same line she'd given me once. Back when I'd asked her if she appreciated the financial support I was providing, if she understood the sacrifices I was making, she'd laughed and said, "You're independent now, time to shine." Like it was a joke, like my concern about being appreciated was somehow amusing or childish. I'd smiled at the time, pretended it didn't sting, filed it away in the back of my mind along with all the other little cuts and dismissals that I'd been collecting like painful souvenirs. "You're independent now, time to shine," I texted back, adding a little sparkle emoji for effect, really leaning into the cheerful encouragement angle, matching the exact tone she'd used when she dismissed my feelings. The message showed as delivered, then as read, and I watched those 3 little dots appear that meant she was typing a response, then disappear, then appear again, then disappear again. Like she couldn't quite figure out what to say, how to respond to having her own words reflected back at her. The silence after that text was chef's kiss perfect. The kind of profound, echoing silence that speaks volumes, that carries more weight than any angry speech or lengthy explanation could have conveyed. It was the sound of reality setting in, of consequences arriving, of someone realizing that the gravy train had not just slowed down, but had completely jumped the tracks and was now lying on its side in a ditch on fire with no rescue coming. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, treating your financial benefactor like an inconvenient accessory wasn't the smartest long-term strategy. My phone stayed mercifully quiet for the rest of the afternoon, which meant they were probably having an emergency family meeting, gathering together to discuss this unexpected crisis, trying to figure out how to handle the situation now that their reliable money source had suddenly developed opinions and boundaries. I imagined them sitting around Jessica's parents' dining room table, the one I'd helped them buy when they claimed their old one was falling apart, discussing strategies, maybe trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if this was just a temporary tantrum that would blow over if they waited it out or applied the right pressure. Revenge tastes best when it's notarized, stamped with an official seal, and filed in triplicate with the appropriate governmental agencies. There's something deeply satisfying about taking raw emotion, anger, hurt, betrayal, and transforming it into legally binding documents that have the weight of law behind them. It's like turning your feelings into weapons that can't be argued with, can't be dismissed, can't be sweet-talked or manipulated away, because they're right there in black and white with signatures and dates and legal language that doesn't care about anyone's feelings. I met Miss Linda Carmichael on a Thursday afternoon at her office in downtown, one of those sleek law firms on the 20th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that make you feel like you're floating above the city, looking down on all the regular people dealing with their regular problems while you handle serious business. The receptionist offered me coffee in a real mug, not those disposable cups, which I took as a good sign. Places that serve coffee in actual mugs tend to take themselves seriously, tend to be the kind of firms that get stuff done rather than just talking about getting stuff done. Linda was exactly what I needed. Mid-40s, sharp as a tack, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that comes from spending 20 years dealing with messy divorces and financial disputes. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, minimal jewelry, and had reading glasses perched on her nose that she peered over like a professor about to explain why your thesis was fundamentally flawed. Her handshake was firm, her office was organized, and her first question was, "How much documentation do you have?" which told me she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. I'd brought everything. Bank statements going back 6 years, receipts for major purchases, documentation of every tuition payment, every loan to Jessica's parents that had never been repaid, every expense I'd covered for Sophie's education. I'd spent the previous 2 nights organizing it all into a binder with colored tabs and chronological order. Because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. The binder landed on her desk with a satisfying thump that made Linda's eyebrows rise appreciatively. "Someone's been keeping records," she said, flipping through the pages with the speed of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. Her eyes scanned the numbers, her expression remaining neutral, but her occasional nod suggesting she was finding exactly what she needed. "This is good. This is very good. Most people who come in here have maybe a few bank statements and a vague sense of being wronged. You've got a paper trail that could stretch to the moon." She reviewed every document methodically, occasionally pausing to make notes on a legal pad in handwriting that was somehow both neat and indecipherable, the way doctors and lawyers write, like they're using a code only they can read. After about 20 minutes, she looked up at me over those glasses and smiled, and it was the kind of smile that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. And for once, that someone wasn't me. "You've got every receipt," she said, tapping her pen against the legal pad with a rhythm that sounded almost triumphant. "Every transaction documented, every payment tracked, every financial contribution clearly attributed to you. If you want to cut them off legally and financially, I can lock it down today. We're talking ironclad, airtight, no loopholes to exploit kind of lockdown. They won't be able to access anything without your explicit permission, and that permission can be withheld at your discretion."
"Do it," I said, not even hesitating, not second-guessing, not allowing myself to feel guilty about what I was about to do, and add a cherry on top. Make the house title solely mine. The house was technically in both our names, Jessica and mine, but I paid the entire down payment, covered every mortgage payment for the past 6 years, handled all the maintenance, all the repairs, all the property taxes. She'd contributed exactly $0 to the mortgage while simultaneously treating it like her personal castle where her family could stay rent-free whenever they felt like it. Linda nodded, already typing notes into her computer with fingers that flew across the keyboard like she was composing a symphony of legal devastation. "That'll require some additional paperwork since you're currently married. We'll need to file for a formal separation of assets, potentially leading to divorce proceedings if that's the direction you want to go. But given the documentation you've provided, proof that you've been the sole financial contributor to the property, we can make a strong case for transferring full ownership to you, especially if we can demonstrate that your spouse has been financially exploitative." "Financially exploitative," I repeated, testing the phrase in my mouth. It sounded so official, so legitimate, taking what I'd felt in my gut and giving it legal terminology that made it real, made it something that courts would recognize and address. "Yeah, that's exactly what it's been. Can you really get the house entirely in my name?" "With this documentation," Linda gestured at the binder, which had become my new favorite possession, "absolutely. We'll file a partition action, demonstrate your sole financial investment in the property, establish that your spouse has contributed nothing to the mortgage or maintenance, and petition the court to award you full ownership. Given the circumstances and your evidence, I'd say we have a 90% chance of success, and that's me being conservative." By evening, every financial tie was severed with the precision of a surgical team performing a complicated procedure. Linda worked fast. I'd expected this to take weeks, maybe months, but she had connections, knew which clerks to call, knew how to expedite paperwork when necessary. We filed separation of assets documents, closed joint credit lines, removed authorized users from my accounts, changed beneficiary designations, updated insurance policies, revoked powers of attorney that I'd granted Jessica in a fit of marital optimism years ago, and basically built a financial fortress around everything I owned.
Jessica's parents' helping hand on my mortgage? Gone. Erased like it had never existed. Their names removed from any documentation that had somehow gotten them listed as co-borrowers or emergency contacts, or whatever justification they'd used to worm their way into my property ownership. Linda had looked at those documents with barely concealed disgust, muttering something about financial parasites that made me feel simultaneously validated and embarrassed that I'd let it happen in the first place.
Sophie's tuition plan? Canceled. Terminated. Destroyed with extreme prejudice. There were 2 semesters left on the payment plan I'd set up, installments that were supposed to automatically withdraw from my account to cover her final year and bar prep. Linda pulled up the documents, sent official cancellation notices, and made sure there was no possible way those payments could accidentally process. "She'll get notification within 24 hours, Linda said with satisfaction. "And they don't do payment plans after cancellation. She'll have to pay in full if she wants to continue." Jessica's credit card extension snipped like a thread that had been hanging loose, annoying me every time I saw it on my statement. It wasn't even supposed to be an extension. It was my card, my account. But I'd added her as an authorized user years ago, and somehow that had evolved into her treating it like her personal unlimited funding source. Her spending habits were documented in my binder too. Lunches with her friends that cost $100, shopping trips that racked up thousands. Those small purchases that added up to significant chunks of my income every month. "The card will be declined next time she tries to use it," Linda explained, typing something into her computer that I assumed was the cancellation request. "She'll probably call the credit card company thinking it's an error, and they'll tell her the account holder, that's you, has removed her authorization. It's effective immediately." If my bank account was a castle, and trust me, after 6 years of treating it like a community resource, I was ready to embrace the castle metaphor. I just raised the drawbridge, filled the moat with alligators, posted archers on the walls, and hung a giant banner that said, "No entry without explicit written permission notarized by a licensed attorney." It felt good. Better than good. It felt right. Like I was finally taking control of something that should have always been under my control. Reclaiming territory that had been occupied by foreign forces for way too long. "There's one more thing," Linda said, pulling out a document that looked particularly official. Heavy paper with gold embossing. "If you're serious about protecting yourself, we should file for legal separation immediately. It stops the clock on any claims your spouse might have to future earnings, creates a clear dividing line between what's yours and what's potentially negotiable in a divorce. You don't have to file for divorce right away if you're not ready, but the legal separation gives you protection while you figure out your next moves." I looked at the document, at the blank space where my signature would go, at the legal language that would officially declare my marriage as good as over. Part of me wanted to hesitate. Wanted to feel something. Sadness, regret, nostalgia for what we used to have, or what I thought we had. But mostly, I just felt relief, like I was finally acknowledging something that had been true for a long time, but that I'd been too stubborn or too hopeful to admit. "Where do I sign?" I asked, and Linda smiled, that sharp smile again, sliding a pen across her desk toward me. It was a nice pen. Heavy and expensive, the kind that makes signing important documents feel momentous. I picked it up, pressed it against the paper, and watched my signature flow across the line, making it official, making it real, making it impossible to pretend anymore that this marriage was anything other than a financial arrangement that had gone catastrophically wrong. As I walked out of Linda's office that evening, my phone started buzzing with texts and calls. The family panic reaching critical mass as various financial dominoes began falling. I ignored them all, letting the calls go to voicemail, letting the texts pile up unread, because I had nothing to say to them that wasn't already being said by canceled payments and declined transactions. Linda had given me her card, told me to call immediately if anyone tried to pressure me, threaten me, or show up in my house uninvited. She'd also mentioned something about restraining orders if necessary, which seemed extreme, but also oddly comforting knowing that option existed if things got ugly.
3 weeks later, the panic calls started rolling in with the frequency and intensity of a natural disaster warning system. Except instead of tornadoes or hurricanes, the emergency was that their free ride had officially ended and reality was hitting them harder than a freight train with no brakes. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each one triggering the next in a cascade of financial consequences that I'd carefully orchestrated from my office while sipping coffee and feeling absolutely zero remorse. Turns out, when you pull the financial rug out from under people who've been standing on it for years, they notice pretty quickly. Not immediately, because there's always a lag time between action and consequence, but eventually the bills come due and the auto payments fail, and suddenly everyone's wondering why the magic money tree has stopped producing fruit. First came Jessica, naturally, because she was the one who dealt with the household bills and had therefore been the first to discover that the accounts she'd been casually accessing were now as useful as a chocolate teapot. Her call came at approximately 7:45 in the morning on a Monday, which meant she'd probably just tried to pay something and had been hit with the dreaded insufficient funds message, or more accurately, the "this account no longer exists in the way you think it does" message. I was in my car, driving to work, enjoying my commute and a particularly good podcast about financial independence. The irony wasn't lost on me when her name popped up on my screen. I considered not answering, letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear this. "The utilities are in your name!" she practically shouted into the phone, skipping any greeting or preamble, her voice pitched high with that special kind of panic that comes from realizing you're about to lose basic services. "The power's off. I tried to pay the bill online, but I can't access the account. And when I called them, they said only the account holder can make payments, and that's you. And they said the bill is 60 days overdue, and they shut off the power this morning, and I have a work call in an hour, and my laptop is dying. And what the hell did you do?" The thing about utilities is that they give you plenty of warning before they shut things off. Multiple notices, phone calls, emails, texts, basically every form of communication except perhaps carrier pigeon, which meant Jessica had been ignoring those warnings for 2 months, probably assuming I'd handle it like I always handled it, like I'd handled everything for our entire marriage. The fact that she hadn't noticed the warnings, hadn't thought to mention them to me, hadn't considered that maybe she should check on the status of bills for services she used every single day, told me everything I needed to know about how much attention she'd been paying to our financial situation, which is to say, none, zero, zilch.
"Oh no," I said, my voice dripping with the kind of false sympathy you use when someone's complaining about a problem that's entirely their own fault and you're secretly enjoying their suffering. The pun wasn't even intentional at first, but once I heard it come out of my mouth, I decided to lean into it, really savor the moment. Guess that's what happens when you keep people in the dark. Must be pretty dark in there without electricity, huh? Maybe you should try lighting some candles. Oh, wait, you'd need to buy those yourself. And that requires money, which requires accessing accounts that you no longer have access to. Funny how that works. She started to say something else, probably some combination of pleading and threatening, but I wasn't interested in the negotiation phase of this process. I hung up, silenced my phone, and continued my drive to work, feeling lighter than I had in years. The power would stay off until she figured out how to pay the bill herself, which meant either using her own money, assuming she had any, which was questionable, or calling her parents to bail her out, which would be its own special kind of humiliation. Either way, not my problem anymore. Then came Sophie, her text message arriving around lunchtime, and I could practically feel the desperation radiating through the screen like heat from asphalt on a summer day. "They rejected my bar exam registration. It says payment declined. I've been trying to reach you all morning. The deadline is in 3 days, and if I don't register now, I'll have to wait another 6 months to take it. And that means I can't start applying for jobs. And I already have interviews lined up. And please, I need your help. This is an emergency." The message was followed by approximately 15 exclamation marks and several crying emojis. Like punctuation could somehow convey the urgency that would make me change my mind and open my wallet one more time. The bar exam registration. I'd forgotten about that actually, which was unlike me since I'm usually pretty meticulous about tracking financial obligations. But then again, it wasn't my obligation anymore, was it? It was Sophie's obligation, Sophie's responsibility, Sophie's problem to solve. She was a grown woman with a law degree. Well, almost a law degree. Technically, she still needed to pass the bar exam to actually practice law. But still, she should be perfectly capable of figuring out how to come up with $1,500 on her own without running to her brother-in-law's bank account like it was a public utility. "That's odd," I replied, taking my time to craft the response, making sure every word hit exactly the right note of faux concern mixed with subtle mockery. Maybe the card's feeling underappreciated. You know how cards get when they're constantly used but never acknowledged? They develop self-esteem issues. Probably need some validation before it'll work again. Have you tried thanking it? Maybe sending it a graduation invitation. I almost added a smiley face emoji, but decided that would be too much, would tip from subtle sarcasm into obvious cruelty. And I wanted to maintain plausible deniability here. The response came back almost immediately. Just one word, seriously, in all caps, which I interpreted as her finally understanding that I was, in fact, seriously done being her personal scholarship fund. I didn't reply to that one. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response you can give, especially when the other person is expecting you to cave, to feel guilty, to backtrack and apologize and fix everything like you always have before. Even her parents chimed in, because of course they did, because this was a family crisis, and family crisis required the whole family to gang up on the person who was causing it, which in their minds was me, even though I was actually just the person who'd stopped enabling their dysfunction. Her dad called from their house phone, probably because I blocked both of their cell numbers, and left a voicemail that I listened to on speaker while eating a surprisingly good turkey sandwich from the deli near my office.
"You're being petty," his voice boomed through my phone speaker, filled with righteous indignation and that particular brand of male authority that assumes everyone will fall in line when he uses his serious voice. "This isn't how family treats each other. Jessica is your wife, Sophie is your sister-in-law, and we're your family whether you like it or not. You don't just cut off family because of some misunderstanding about a graduation. Grow up, be a man, and fix this mess you've created." "Petty," I said out loud to my empty office, talking to a voicemail like it could hear me, practicing my response in case I ever decided to actually engage with these people again. I call it budget discipline. I call it financial responsibility. I call it finally having some self-respect after 6 years of being treated like an ATM with feelings that don't matter. The sandwich was really good, by the way. Perfectly balanced ratio of turkey to cheese, just the right amount of mustard. I made a mental note to get it again next week, maybe make it a regular thing. Having money to spend on myself instead of other people's crises was pretty great. Turns out, at that point, my phone felt like a complaint hotline. Just constant incoming calls and messages and notifications. Everyone needing something. Everyone demanding attention. Everyone expecting me to drop everything and solve their problems like I'd been doing for years. Jessica called 6 more times that day. Sophie sent approximately 20 texts, progressing from pleading to angry to something that looked like bargaining. What if I pay you back? What if we set up a payment plan? What if I promise to include you in everything from now on? As if this was about money and not about fundamental respect and basic human decency. Her mom joined the texting brigade around 3 in the afternoon. "I can't believe you're doing this to your own family. What would your mother think?"
which was a low blow considering my mother had passed away 5 years ago and would probably have been horrified at how Jessica's family had been treating me, would have sat me down long before this and asked me why I was letting people walk all over me. But dead mothers make convenient moral authorities for people trying to guilt trip you. I considered setting up actual hold music for these calls, maybe something ironic like Money, Money, Money by ABBA or Take the Money and Run by Steve Miller Band, just to really drive home the theme of what was happening here. But that seemed like more effort than they deserved, more engagement than I was willing to give. Instead, I just let my voicemail fill up until it was full, let my text messages pile up until they became white noise, let the panic spiral into whatever crescendo it was building toward without my participation. The only call I did answer that day was from Chloe, the cousin who'd started this whole thing by telling me about the graduation I'd been excluded from. She called around 5, right as I was packing up to leave the office, and her tone was completely different from the family panic brigade. She sounded almost gleeful, like she was watching her favorite reality show and couldn't wait to give me the recap.
"Oh my God, you should hear them," she said, barely pausing to breathe between words. "They had an emergency family meeting at Jessica's parents' house. Everyone's freaking out. Sophie is crying about missing the bar exam deadline. Jessica's parents are talking about having to sell their timeshare. Jessica keeps saying you'll come around, that you're just upset and you'll calm down and fix everything. It's absolute chaos. And honestly, I'm kind of living for it. Is that bad? That's probably bad, but also, they had this coming." I smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time in what felt like forever. "Not bad at all," I told her. "Not bad at all." A month later, they showed up at my office. Jessica, Sophie, and her parents, all looking like extras from a financial horror movie, the kind where the monster is their own terrible life choices coming back to haunt them. They'd somehow gotten past building security, probably claiming to be clients or lying about having an appointment, and now they were standing in my office doorway looking desperate and vaguely threatening, like a badly coordinated intervention team. Jessica started with her soft voice, the one she used when she wanted something expensive. "Honey, we made a mistake. Let's fix this." "Which part?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know which specific mistake she was willing to acknowledge. The lying, the erasing me, or the part where I funded the season finale of your family's drama? Her dad tried reason. "You're taking this too far." "Oh, I agree," I said. "Next time I'll take it even further, to court." Sophie stepped forward, voice trembling. "Please, I can't register for the next exam without your help." I shrugged. "Funny, I thought paying your fees doesn't make me that important." Even my lawyer would have applauded that delivery. Within weeks, Sophie moved back in with her parents, her fancy apartment near the law school becoming an unaffordable luxury without my monthly deposits. Jessica tried to guilt-trip me with emotional texts, but I was immune, having built up a tolerance to manipulation over 6 years of marriage. Their fancy family brunches stopped. The perfect image cracked like cheap porcelain dropped on concrete. Neighbors started whispering about how the generous husband had walked away. And suddenly, Jessica's family wasn't the successful, upwardly mobile clan they pretended to be. They were broke people who'd been living on someone else's dime. Chloe, the cousin with the gossip gold, kept me updated like she was reporting from a war zone. Sophie's job offer fell through. The parents are behind on payments, and your wife's trying to sell her handbags online, she said during one of our weekly catch-up calls. I didn't celebrate. I just smiled quietly and poured myself a whiskey, savoring the smooth burn as it went down. After all, karma doesn't need applause. It works freelance, bills by the hour, and always collects payment eventually. A month later, I was sitting in my backyard watching the sunset with a calm heart and a cold drink, feeling more at peace than I had in years. The sky was doing that thing where it turns orange and pink, like nature's way of saying, everything's going to be all right. Jessica had moved out.
Sophie had finally called to say she understood why I did what I did, her voice quiet and genuinely apologetic for the first time in our entire relationship. I told her good, because this wasn't revenge, it was a refund. And that's exactly what it was. Taking back what was mine, reclaiming my dignity and self-respect with interest. Her family's pride had cost them everything. Mine had earned me peace, freedom, and a bank account that was finally just mine. Sometimes you don't need to yell, argue, or explain. You just hit cancel subscription, change your password, and let people miss the access they abused. And when they beg to reverse it, you simply smile and say, "Sorry, no refunds."